YouTube seems to be having some technical issues tonight, but I've finally made it on live. Great to be with you. I want to talk about tonight about some strategies for breaking addiction. I'm going to include some information from a fantastic doctor, Dr. Jason Fung, who's talking about food addiction. You may not think it's that serious, but people with food addiction are showing all the traits of the classic addictions like drug addiction, alcohol addiction. And the way that food is being designed these days, it really is being manufactured to target our addictive systems, to bring spikes in dopamine and things like that. So it really is in the same league with the way they're engineering food these days. Looking at the example of Johnny Cash, for one, I want to delineate the kind of structures, the systems, and even the spiritual side, which was a big deal for Johnny Cash in dealing with addiction. To start with the Johnny Cash example, I love this book. I read it like over 20 years ago. I grew up listening to Johnny Cash's music. Fantastic. I love the guy and I hope to make it to Tennessee at some point and really bask in the richness of the country music there. I saw the movie that they made about his life, Walk the Line, and they completely omitted the spiritual component of this man's recovery, which was a shame because he really emphasized it in his book. But before we get into that, we'll talk about some of the other things that he set up. But to start with, Johnny Cash, why did he become he was addicted to amphetamines and I think other substances. How did that come about? There's a number of factors, and these are classic things that come into play often when people become addicted to different things. He suffered a major trauma in his life with the tragic death, very traumatic death of his brother, Jack, at the age of 12. And that day, and they show this in the film, Johnny was meant to go and work at the wood shop where his brother suffered this fatal injury. But instead he went fishing, and that's what he felt this tremendous guilt about for much of his life. His brother in the wood shop was working on this cutting machine, and a piece of wood kicked back and pulled him into the machine and like, cut him abdominally. He lived for a week but died. But his brother was even at a young age, a very faithful individual, and he talked about God in that last week. And he said to Johnny that he will expects to see him in heaven. So there was that factor. They also Johnny was a really intense personality. That's probably why he was so successful. But he went hard at things, and that maybe that kind of personality is the kind of personality that's more inclined to get into substance use. The touring kind of regime, going out at night, the touring routine, being in band, being a very successful musician, that kind of lifestyle, a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, a lot of partying. So that's just a few factors that would have contributed to Johnny Cash's situation. And in his book, he talks about, he identifies these different factors that led to his recovery. One of the first things he mentions or comes through is his relationship with June Carter. And a relationship, a romantic relationship, a loving relationship can be such a balm for all that we suffer from. And this is why relationships are coming through so strongly in science as well today. And people are suffering through isolation and loneliness. They're saying that the effect of loneliness that people are dealing with these days is akin to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So having strong relationships, obviously, it's a counter to addictive influences or temptations in your life. Apart from that, he talks about actually Johnny at the kind of peak of his addiction. He crawled into this cave with the intention of dying there. He expected to end his life in this cave, but he had this moment of clarity while in there and decided to go on. He crawled out of the cave, and following from that incident, he resumed his career and really had a peak in his career at that point. And he was performing at the famous, I think, Folsom County prison performances. And I think in the fact that he did these performances in that setting, he was there to help these prisoners, people who are at the rock bottom level of their lives. It says a lot about his character, but also it says about what comes of really dedicating yourself and having the heart to help other people. And I think that would have been a significant factor in his recovery. Before we get deeper into what contributed to Johnny's recovery, I want to play something from this fantastic doctor, Dr. Jason Fung. He's a nephrologist, which means he's become a physician, and then he's gone on to study internal medicine. He specialized in that, then gone on to become a nephrologist specialized in kidney medicine. So he's dealing with patients who have chronic kidney disease, really severe conditions, and he's written a number of really spectacular books. He wrote The Obesity Code, which was a bestseller, and has really helped countless people internationally to lose weight with a very simple method. But at the heart of that is dealing with food addiction, which is a very real thing. And here he is just talking about the value of habit, like setting up a structure in your life as a way to kind of counter addiction. Um, and this is in terms of setting up an eating window. So if you're dealing with food addiction, setting up this time, this is a point in my day where I just don't eat food anymore. And there's benefits also to this on the fasting side, but this is what Dr. Fung has to say about this.
Habit. It's just like boom, boom, brush your teeth, brush your teeth, brush your teeth. You don't think about it, but you get the benefits all the time. Same thing with creating these habits of you eat between here and here, and outside that you don't. By doing that, you actually reduce hunger because it's this conditioning. If you're used to eating whenever you want, then you can get hungry whenever. If you know that you never eat at 9 p.m., then you're not going to get hungry at 9 p.m. because after you create that habit, you're not going to have it. The other thing is around food addictions where people get addicted to food by creating this window where you're not going to be taking that, you can break a lot of these addictions. Remember, treating an addiction is totally different than just other things. So if you're addicted to alcohol, you can't just say, "Oh, alcohol's fine in moderation," right? Just
And that is the reality these days. If we're talking about food, for one, because is being engineered to be highly addictive and to have the same effects as basically drugs, maybe not on the same level of severity. But his point is there's no such thing as moderation. If you tell an alcoholic, just drink less, that doesn't work, right? So it's the same with food addiction. And he doesn't say, it's not a case of cutting out all food, but he talks a lot about the ultra processed food. This is the kind of food, and we're talking about like the cookies and the pizza, and processed food is anything it's not in its natural state. It's had some kind of process done to it. The ultra processed is what Americans are majority assuming, like majorly assuming, it actually constitutes the larger part of the American diet these days. These ultra processed foods, and they are engineered to be addictive. So setting up an eating window, setting up this time. Maybe in the beginning it's a case of I'll eat whatever up to this point, but 10 o'clock or 6 o'clock, that's it. I'm not gonna eat food from this point. I'm not gonna touch these particular foods after this point. He talks about as being very successful. So the importance of structure. Getting back to Johnny Cash, one of the things that he speaks about, like and the thing that got missed in the film Walk the Line was the value of spirituality in his life, and he talks about, and this came through very much in his songs, particularly after that point where he crawled out of his cave, and he'd hit rock bottom, and I don't know, there's something in these, like you look at these groups like Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, they have the 12 steps. And I don't know if it's the final step, but it's about like surrendering, like you give it up to God or whatever your version of God is, your higher self or whatever it is. But this idea of kind of surrendering and the acceptance that there's something beyond yourself, beyond this life, beyond this human life. There's something beyond that, something greater than that, and kind of surrendering to that. And I think in that there's a certain humility and kind of a weight off your shoulders. I don't know what, it doesn't really matter necessarily what faith it is that you subscribe to, but um, I think a lot of addiction, and actually I see a lot of parallels between addiction and obsessive compulsive disorder, which they say very much is driven by blame, by feelings of guilt and shame. And I think this is a big issue in addiction. It's the shame you can't deal with. It's a guilt. So if you have the understanding that I'm not perfect, I'm just a flawed human being, and actually that's the reality of human existence. We are flawed. We make mistakes. We screw up. The idea is that we're supposed to improve on that and try and spiritually improve ourselves. From that starting point, it's a bit easier maybe to deal with yourself and to accept your flaws, accept the things that you've done wrong, and maybe that is one reason why you might be able to deal with addiction a bit easier from a spiritual standpoint. Uh, Another thing, a basic thing that you get through spirituality is a community in many cases, and generally a healthy community. You can find these in other places, and I'll talk again about Narcotics Anonymous. I've been to Narcotics Anonymous meetings not because I was dealing with a drug addiction, but to support someone else or other people who are going there. And I was very impressed. I was very impressed with the caliber of people, just the frankness of the way people spoke there, and the humility of people there. And there's something about, addiction is still judged very harshly in society, but if we really look at ourselves, I think we're all dealing with some level of addiction. And there's something that comes, I mean, with every bad situation, there's got to be some silver lining to it. And when someone is dealing with such a severe addiction and they start losing so many things, they lose relationships, they might lose their career, they lose money, they lose whatever, they hit rock bottom. And that triggers a kind of reevaluation of yourself, of your position in the universe, and it brings humility with it. And that's what I got from going to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And so, yeah, these environments can be very helpful to be around other people who are supporting you. And this is what I'm going to play another clip from Dr. Fung here. He's talking again about this in the context of food addiction and Weight Watchers, and why he says why this was a successful model, one of the most successful um, models for losing weight that there has been out there.
Habits, just like boom, boom, brush.
Okay,
What
here we go.
sustained them, what made them the biggest name in weight loss for a good 40 years was the community support, right? And that's the part that everybody forgets. Their diet was not that different or good or revolutionary. It was the same diet you could find anywhere. The point system was basically, I mean, they rejigged it a bit to make it proprietary, but it was nothing extraordinary that you couldn't read any standard textbook or go to their library and get a book. And you could figure out their diet in 2 seconds, right? What made them successful was the support. Same with Alcoholics Anonymous. What's important is not their 12 steps. You could read their 12 steps, anywhere online.
Right. It's I mean, yeah, I think there's definitely something to the 12 steps and the fact that this model works along so many different realities of addiction, from Alcoholics Anonymous, drug addiction, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, even GROW, the mental health group that started, I think, sometime in the 50s. They also have a 12-step program, and that has that final step of surrendering to a higher purpose, surrendering to God. So there is definitely something in that model that works. But yeah, the idea of the support, like having this group of people and you develop accountability within this group. This works, and again, it's a salve for the isolation that many people are dealing with, which again is another reason they find another reason to use substances they shouldn't be using. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to this, my thoughts around dealing with addiction and looking at what, like, I read that Johnny Cash book 20 years ago, and it's still stuck in my mind. And to end on that note, I remember so many parts of that book still, but he talks about in the end how, and he kind of overcome his addiction to some extent and then relapsed, and then managed to defeat it again, realizing I just cannot take. I think like he'd taken sleeping tablets or something like that, and caused him to relapse, and then coming to the realization, I really just can't use any of this stuff. I'm going to be tempted to use things. There's always going to be some justification, but I just cannot touch this stuff anymore because I'm going to go down that path again. And he describes being in a plane, and I probably traveling to somewhere across America, tour from a concert. And of course, the death of his brother, the traumatic death of his brother, remained heavily in his mind. And it looked like, I think the plane was having some kind of difficulty, maybe going through some turbulence, and it wasn't looking so, maybe looking a bit gruesome grueling at that time, maybe posing some kind of threat. And he kind of went over a bump as he was thinking about his brother, and then things settled down. And he took it as a sign that his brother was just kind of out there in the universe communicating with him. And again, that belief in spirituality and the idea that there is something beyond us. And